Welcome to the Hole in the Head podcast. Today we're joined by Nick Ellis, the Executive Director of the RPM Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing careers in vehicle restoration and preservation. Nick shares some insights on the organization's work to preserve some of the most endangered skills that keep classic cars on the road. Engaging the next generation of car enthusiasts is not a small task, and we'll talk about what it takes to make a more inclusive and vibrant car culture. But first, a very important question.
It's unusual that I start the show because usually Andy has some sort of very insightful introduction, and I don't. All I want to know is that we got this guy named Nick Ellis with us, and Nick, we're going to find out what you do and why you do it. But the most important thing I want to know right now is what's the most recent thing that you worked on?
I was going to ask that question. It's not fair.
Honestly, the most recent thing, I was talking with Andy about this earlier. I inherited from my uncle an absolutely beautiful 1933 Ford Cabriolet that is unlike anything I've ever owned before. In the sense of, I've had plenty of Fords. I'm a very big Ford guy. Everything that I have owned in the past has been rusty and half working, if it's working at all. This is just such a perfect, beautiful car. The only thing that I had to do was put the battery in it. So I don't know if that counts as working on it, but that's the last thing I've had my hands on.
You got dirty, yeah.
Yeah, I got a little dirty. It probably got dirtier from me touching it.
How nice. A fully restored 33 Ford Cabriolet.
Yeah, it's made me question my whole pathway of, rescuing derelict vehicles from the side of the road and seeing like how nice it is to own something nice.
It sounds like you kind of have to have clean clothes to drive that. Not like this isn't like a tools and oily pants and driving down the road and fixing on, and doing 5 things to get it to run and going to AutoZone on your way there or whatever. It sounds like you put on some clean clothes and probably drive this successfully to a cafe or to an outing, right?
Yeah, this is a church clothes car. I've got nieces and nephews, and I'm very much of the mind, like we've got to let the next generation in and let them like enjoy the car. And I've got other cars that I just, jump in and touch the things and switch the switches and do whatever you want. And within 5 seconds of my niece being in this one, I was like, okay, let's play something else now. Because she's like grabbing the very delicate turn signal thing, and she's like yanking it up and down. I'm like, okay.
Hands in pockets. Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Turned into one of those velvet rope guys.
Well, do you feel like on that, because I do, whenever there's something nice and like maybe valuable or collectible, whatever, like I feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome.
Yes.
When I'm with other people and it's like, well, this is mine. It's nice, but you have to understand that, like, I feel like I have to qualify my grubbiness. Yeah.
You notice that I had to tell you guys that I inherited it, right? Because there's no way I would be able to afford this car on my own. So that's what I tell everybody. Like, okay, I know, but.
So you have no history or file of checks that you wrote on this car, is what you're saying? Okay.
Nothing at all. Anything can happen.
Well, that's a special burden because now it can't leave your hands in worse shape than it came in. So now you got a standard to live up to. Yeah.
No, it absolutely will leave my hands worse because I'm going to use this thing.
Andy, what's the most recent thing you worked on?
Actually, funny enough, just before this, and I'm smelling gasoline in my hands now. I got the BMW /2 fuel tank cleaned out. I was thinking I had to reline the tank, but it's this Schwarzmeyer. It's a very rare, hard to find tank. So the insides got baffling, and to do a liner was going to be a pain in the butt, and it was going to get uneven and all this. But luckily, I just flushed the system. I got clean gas coming out, and I rode that son of a gun around the block. It purrs first.
I know what you smell like. A little bit of clean fuel and a lot of old fuel, varnishy kind of that old gas smell. That's a lot worse than the fresh gas smell. You can't get rid of that. That's on your hands for days, right?
Yeah. Well, have you and you've burned yourself on the calf or something, or your arm reaching under for the exhaust or whatever. And after I got done writing this, I almost showed up with a giant exhaust burn on my forehead today because I'm in my little garage. And so I reached down to, catch some gas that was spilling. And I was like, well, that's really hot. There's the exhaust right there. I just barely did not burn myself. That was a near miss.
All right. Okay, the last thing I worked on.
I was trying to say, let's ask Blaine, because then you're gonna pout that we didn't ask you.
No, I know. Okay. I have to ask myself. I have to ask myself all the questions because Andy just likes to usually talk about himself. So I'll ask myself as if I'm part of the show.
What did you work on?
Oh, hey, I got my BMW K75 to run. I wrecked it back in November and hurt myself and haven't ridden since. And so it's been sitting there. And I'm now going to cut it up and make a cafe bike out of it, since I damaged all the bodywork. But I thought I'd see if I could get it started first. And I just had to mess with the starter relay, and which I always have to mess with on that bike. But it came to life, and it idled after so many minutes. And so
when I was in my early 20s, I had a summer where every mechanical thing that I touched just absolutely fell apart and disintegrated on me.
Oh, that's every Tuesday for me, but you go ahead. Yeah.
This was remarkable. It was like I was legitimately cursed. Like my daily driver died. I had a 67 Firebird that I was trying to restore on the side, but it was at least running and driving. So I took that out. That developed a fuel leak. Then my father had a 1950 Ford Meteor, the Canadian Ford. And he's like, okay, you need to get to work here. Just use that. The starter went bad on it. So anyway, this long line of cars that just died because I touched them ended with one of my best friends had a BMW K75, and that was the thing that stopped. That's what stopped the curse, because that thing just I was able to ride that thing it's a 3-cylinder, really cool bike.
Yeah, it is so not fast, but it is so pleasing to ride it.
Yeah.
And after a while, you just kind of get hooked on it, and I can see why you just eat miles on it. Everybody talks about. I think I'll probably sell this when I'm done with it in this iteration, because I have a different one I'm going to work on. And I had a guy I said, well, it's got pretty high mileage on it, and he said, what is it? I got 82,000 on it. He said, oh, I had a 314,000 on mine when I sold it.
God.
So I don't know if they're all that for that long, but they're so inherently smooth.
It was a joy to ride, and the guy who bought it from my friend rode it from Chicago back to where he lived in Canada.
Yeah.
So there you go for putting miles on it, right?
Yeah, I think it's just so once you sit on it, you just all of a sudden you just feel like, well, I could go to New York for some pizza.
Going.
Yeah, I'll just keep going. Yeah, there's no reason to stop. So. All right, so let's find out more about Nick Ellis and why he's on the show, other than the fact that he's got a 33 Ford Cabriolet, which we would love to talk about more, and we will. But there's another reason that you're here, because you're involved in motorsports in a different way than most of us, in terms of just getting dirty and having a love for it. You kind of have a professional relationship to motorsport and motorsport history. Tell us about it.
I do. I am the executive director of the RPM Foundation, and this is a skilled trades advocate. We've been around for about 20 years, and what we do is we try to advance careers in vehicle restoration and preservation. So we have given over $4 million in grant funds to programs that educate the next generation on how to work on these cars. We have started an apprenticeship program and an internship program. We've done, I'd love to get a chance to talk about this. We've done a really fun program that we're just launching now called the Endangered Skills Program, where we try to capture skills that are disappearing across the country that
great.
are, needed on, in order to work on these vehicles. But that's my connection to motorsports from a professional sense.
Well, we're going to want to know a lot more about the foundation. We're going to get into that. But how did you come to it? How were you a guy with sketchy cars in your past, and all of a sudden now you've got this legitimate job and purpose related to motorsports? How'd that work out?
I took probably the craziest pathway to this that I can think of. I worked in IT for most of my career and was laid off in the economic downturn in 2008. And my father at the time, my father's the one that I got the bug for cars from. He had retail stores his whole career, and when he closed down the retail stores, he decided to open a collector car dealership, and he would, buy cars at auction and spiff them up and sell them. And I, was throwing out resumes left and right, and couldn't get arrested. So I, just to pass time, would go to the shop and hang out with my dad. And I had a real knack for working on cars. I had worked on motorcycles and cars when I was in my 20s. And now I'm mid 30s. And so I came on with my dad and I started doing this with him. And eventually I stopped looking for a job and just did this. So we did that together for about 10 years. And then when he retired, I really wanted something that would, reconnect me to people again, because it was just the two of us. And so I actually went back into IT for a year. I was the administrator of a SQL Server database and absolutely hated that. And then I went to a birthday party, and I was talking to a woman at this birthday party, and I told her that what I did for a living, that I restored cars on the side. And she says, "Well, you must know of the RPM Foundation." No, I don't. And she said, "Well, the president of the foundation is a friend of mine. She lives nearby. I'm going to introduce her to you." And I met Diane Fitzgerald, who was the president of the RPM Foundation at the time. And she was looking for somebody to manage the grants program. And I had no experience in education, no experience in nonprofits, but knew a lot about cars and feel very passionately that we need to keep this industry and the culture behind it continuing. And so they took a chance on me and hired me on, and that's how I ended up working for the foundation.
Oh, yeah. Well, it sounds like a very good happenstance in your life for sure. Andy, what do you got?
Well, I knew Nick's story, and I want to be Nick's situation when I grow up, kind of thing, because it's one thing to have a track and a trajectory of the thing that you. I mean, I'm will not discount that you had an interest in IT and technology and that sort of the inherent. I mean, I don't want to project here, but the inherent sort of organization that's interesting, right? But as a thing you do every day, paired with this thing that you do in the evening, like those two are just, they weigh real different.
Yes.
And so I have a lot of admiration and sort of like, if nothing else, just sort of hope, if that's not too hokey, that like one can do a thing that they're passionate about, want to do, and arguably making a big difference. I mean, in this little small sphere of stuff that we think is important.
Yeah.
Making a difference in that. That's awesome.
Like this sort of redemption of your life. Will that happen for any of the rest of us, or are you the only one, and are we doomed?
Yeah. You guys are making this random thing that happened to me sound really, really noble, by the way. No, well, I this is what I tell the young people that are in our network that are very passionate about doing this kind of work. But the world right now, and I say right now, there is a big movement to get away from that, that typical 4-year, everybody goes to college, everybody gets a bachelor's degree. So, it's a little bit of a misnomer to say it's right now, but historically and within the last, 40, 50 years, that's been kind of frowned upon, that like, okay, maybe you're really good at this, but there's no way you could actually make a living at it. So I tell people, look, you got to look at my story. I was making more money as a database administrator than I'd ever made in any of my careers. And I couldn't stand it. And then I took, a 50% pay cut to take this job because on paper, I had none of the qualifications for it, but I was very passionate about it. So, I guess it is possible if you're willing to eat ramen soup for a while. But like,
that's true.
In the long run, it did work out great because, I stuck with it and eventually became the executive director of the organization. But I'm a big advocate of, if there is something that you love doing, there's no reason why you can't pursue it as a career.
I have a question that might be a little out of turn, and if you don't feel comfortable answering it, that's fine. But let me lead up to it. Blaine, do you remember when we had the Fiat in San Francisco?
Yeah.
When I had the blue Fiat. So when I was in a corporate job at an unnamed company, and I pitched that, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea if we took this car and restored it with some kids after school and took some of our technologies and applied those technologies to this car? In that case, it was 3D design. We built some stuff. And so Blaine and I took a friend of ours who was a high school teacher, brought his class in, and we taught him how to do carbon fiber layup. We did some 3D design stuff. Mind you, the bare minimum of teaching them these crafts to sort of be able to call it, we taught them these crafts.
Right.
But we leverage this as an opportunity to sort of bring in an old car and these new technologies and marry the two, but then also, I mean, to the extent that we did, pass along some knowledge, and they were super receptive to it. Like, I don't remember if you remember, I've got pictures of you teaching these kids how to like sand down primer or sand down Bondo before you prime, and like that's not exciting at all, but they were into it. Like, just as a process and a manual hands-on process, they were super into it.
Yeah.
So I guess my question was, like, have you ever tried to shoehorn in something that was your own sort of like, hey, I bet I can get Uncle whomever to pay for this, and
this sounds like a job for a foundation.
This is yeah.
Well, what you're talking about in terms of, here's something that might not typically fit into a program. When, I'm gonna say that, this, as when we were doing grant funding, and I'll explain that in a second. But when we were primarily doing grant funding, we would get approached by a lot of programs that were just straight automotive technology programs. And there's a lot of support for that already. And so our mission is very, very narrow. And we want to make sure that if we're going to support an automotive program, they're teaching vintage technology. They're teaching, working on an English wheel, or these concepts that are going to help young people at least get enlightened to a career in vehicle restoration and preservation. So we would get schools that every now and then would have somebody donated them a 65 Mustang, and we don't know what to do with it. So they could apply to us for grant funding for parts to restore this car. So here's this situation where you've got, classrooms full of young people who are going down one pathway to automotive technology because they think maybe there's nothing else. And then we give them the opportunity to, hey, wait a second, maybe I can work on this carbureted mechanical timing, old school technology vehicle. And I like to think that that pathway that we provided for young people has resulted in a lot of them going into a career that they normally wouldn't have considered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm so interested in how that occurs and what happens for it. And so I like the fact that you are a skilled trades advocate, and that you're trying to preserve these endangered skills.
Yeah.
But what happens for the world if these endangered skills just disappear?
Yeah. That's an excellent question.
What are we actually losing? Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, what happens when this happens is you've got all these different tiers of vehicles. You've got the the Duesenbergs out there, and you've got the the area that I used to play in, which is mid-century Fords, and then you've got motorcycles and Model A's and things that you can pick up for kind of cheap and work on them and get them out on the road. What happens is it becomes more and more exclusive. If these skills to restore these cars start to go away, then only the very few shops remaining that can still hang on to young people and entice them to come into this and afford to pay for them. If you've got something where there's only 10 craftspeople left who can do something, you got to pay those 10 craftspeople $500,000 to do the job now, because they're going to work on Duesenbergs and Cords instead of Fords and things. So what happens is this becomes less accessible to the young person who finally has a little bit of disposable income and wants to get into this as a hobby. So then the hobby starts to disappear. And what I keep coming back to is there's a genuine culture behind that hobby. So that culture disappears, that way that we all connect. I mean, the three of us didn't know each other before this call, but we're going to have plenty to talk about because we all have this shared interest. So that goes away if we don't have that skilled workforce to sustain the vehicles and make them accessible.
Oh, I love that perspective on it, because Andy and I are often talking about, one of our pet peeves is that there's all sorts of things that happen on internet forums that we hate, right? So if you belong to a forum and one of them is, guy says, hey, where do I get an alternative part, for this particular vehicle or whatever? And then someone always says, well, if you can't afford to buy the remanufactured part or whatever, then you don't have any business being in this crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated that. And I remember, trying to be a campaigner against that. I used to belong to the Pierce Arrow Club when I had a Pierce Arrow. And you're so right about it just gets pushed so up market, and it gets pushed in such an elite category. And all these guys would sit around and ridicule anybody for not being able to afford to, do a museum restoration on their car. Yeah. And the truth is, I was always interested, my heart just goes out to the guy. And in fact, I take anybody in Arizona that's got a broken car on their way somewhere, and they can stay here, and I will work for them. Just because I think the adventure and the idea of doing it, and it's the guys on the shoestring that have my heart, Wow. And not that I don't appreciate the nature of doing something, putting your money where your mouth is, using the success of your life to, I get that, how that relates into a beautiful project. But on the other hand, I saw a young guy post in the group one time, "Hey, what would it cost me to get into a Pierce Arrow and and use it as a driver?" And then first thing, Pierce Arrow is not a driver. It's like, and I won't tell you where it went from there. But the ridiculous assumption of what it would take. The guys are just rattling off. You're 20,000 into paint. It'll be 15 to 20,000 in chrome. And all this kind of stuff that we throw around as if that's the only way to do it. And I like the fact that you're saying that if the skills are more available in a younger set of people, that means that they're going to apply them to a wider set of experiences and vehicles.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, this thing, we don't have to go to the one guy that knows how to make, that one piece for your, that little bearing. The oddball cars like your Ford have there's a little bearing in the water pump that you got to pack,
right.
And you kind of just, there's always a little bit of fiddling with that. But anyway, if all of a sudden that becomes a young person acquires that knowledge and is able to, engage with that in a variety of different ways with a variety of different people, all of a sudden we're not all beholden to that one. It's always one mean guy that you have to beg to get on the phone, he seems to hate his life and he hates his customers, but yet we just sit back and we beg him to pay attention to us, and we just throw money at him, hoping that sometime within the next 2 years, and don't ever call him, he'll call you, that he'll get your stuff back to you.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it is something that really, really bothers me. And it's not just on the internet forums, but, it all comes back to attitude, right? So if somebody comes into that forum and says, "Hey, I want to daily drive a Pierce Arrow," well, what that person did was just drive a potential steward of that car out of it, because okay, I was enthusiastic about this, but you're a jerk. So now I'm not going to get into this culture. So the other thing that I see a lot on the forums, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too, even when somebody comes in wanting information, like when I first joined up with my father and we were working on cars, I was getting into things that were beyond what I normally would have known how to do. So I'd go on an internet forum and I'd say, "Hey, how do you remove the steering column out of a 68 Camaro?" And somebody goes, "Well, if you got to ask us how to do that, you shouldn't be drop the wrench, walk away from it. You're just going to do." Well, look, man, you didn't know something at some point. Somebody taught you how to do something.
But now people are complaining that knowledge is dying. Well, there's a direct correlation between you being a prick and passing on the information, because no one wants to talk to you.
That's right.
Circle. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's probably my second most hated response on the internet was, it's in your manual, or it's in so-and-so's manual.
Yeah, or Google is your friend.
Yeah. And
use the search tool. There's plenty of threads on this. Use the search tool. As if
take 5 minutes and impart your knowledge onto somebody else, and you know what? You'll feel better for it.
I've started to say that. I've started to use that response with my family when they ask me to do things or ask me where things are, and I say, "Use the search tool, use your manual or whatever." And it didn't take long before nobody wanted to celebrate Father's Day.
I can't imagine why.
That's kind of what I found anyway. So. Also, on the other side of this question, then, so what can we look forward to as the RPM Foundation flourishes and is able to capture these endangered skills and preserve some of these things? What are you going to see different in your lifetime, or at least the run of the career you have with the RPM Foundation? We're not talking about the whole world, just your world. So what is it that you're going to see when it's like, look at that, we taught somebody how to pour Babbitt bearings, for these old pre-war cars, nobody does that anymore. Or we taught someone
right there.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's one of them right there. So I mean, I was talking about the Endangered Skills program. Babbiting is on our list.
Okay.
So to back up a little bit, what we did here is we sent a survey out to the topper stores that are in our network and asked them, okay, what are the skills that are out there that are being underrepresented by people who by people who practice them? What are the skills that are not being practiced enough? And then let's rank those skills in order of how desperately they're needed. And so if something is scoring really low on the amount of people out there practicing, but really high on the amount of need out there, then that scores really high on our list of, okay, we've got to do something to preserve and stabilize this skill. And Babbitt bearings is right up there. I mean, I can think of one shop in the state of Illinois where I live that still does it. And I'm sure, if you go across the country, I'm sure it's less than one per state. So what we'll do in that case is we'll find somebody who's really a master of this skill, and we'll pair them with an apprentice, and then we'll record the process of them, the master teaching the apprentice how to do this skill. So not only do we have a new young person who knows how to do this skill, we've got the process of instruction captured. So we can share that with other learning institutions, or even just, online, so people can look at this and see how this stuff is done. Now, granted, babbiting isn't something you can just do in your garage, but there are other skills that we're hoping to impart upon as many people as we can. Gauge rebuilding is something that's
there you go.
Now, again, another one that you need more equipment than the shade tree mechanic can do, but glass shaping is another one.
Yes.
You've got to
set glasses and lenses,
right? And you're never going to get the glass on that again. So we're trying to find these skills and save those and be able to say that we're responsible for stabilizing these skills. The other thing that I'm hoping to personally have an impact on with the RPM Foundation is, in my time as leading the organization, I've moved us away from the grant funding and more towards active workforce development, and that's the development of our apprenticeship program. So whereas previously, really the only outlets for you to go into vehicle restoration and preservation were these post-secondary programs where there's less than 100 kids coming out of these programs every year, and they're at times very expensive to attend. You can now go from a really competent high school level automotive technology program, or a change of a career from say the military service, directly into an apprenticeship in one of these shops where you're actually making money while you're learning how to do this craft rather than spending the money. So it manages expectations on both sides, and it's also overall a better situation for an apprentice in that they're not going into debt in order to learn this craft.
Oh yeah. Oh man, I'm so glad to know that that's being addressed, because in a sense, I'll throw it back to you next, Andy. Sorry to be dominating here, but I love the fact that a high school student could learn how to reproduce vintage car lenses.
Yes.
So that's a possibility. And you think, well, if I'm the dad, I'm going to go, okay, great. That sounds like a nice thing to do for the summer. What are you going to do? How you going to support yourself? How you paying back your student loans? Or whatever you're going to do. But what you're saying, if I understand this correctly, if the RPM Foundation is able to continue on this trajectory, that not by the time you save a skill like lens reproduction, then all of a sudden, if my son or daughter completes the lens reproduction program, I now have a community and almost a market already, right?
Yeah.
Because now I can come to all my RPM affiliates and just let everybody know, hey, there is a lens reproducer in our family or in our ecosystem, right? And so all of a sudden now, the RPM Foundation, kind of has a real place to land for someone to operate what would start out as a side hustle in the garage, which is great. And who knows, maybe they could formalize that and take it further, or just leave it on the sideline or whatever. But nonetheless, the world would have access to that teardrop lens
exactly
that you need, that you knocked out, or that your granddaughter kicked out with a baseball or threw, or whatever. And now you don't have to hate your family anymore. So it's
which is a side benefit.
Yeah. So will there be some follow on for these young people that acquire these skills? And I know that you have a little bit of a network in terms of, like, 'cause I see that from your website, that there's places to look for jobs, but could a person start a lens reproduction business and get training and then say, hey, can I live in somehow under the RPM umbrella and let people know that I do lenses?
Well, the pathway for somebody who comes into our network would be first to enter the apprenticeship program. And then if you are in a shop that, leans towards this way, they do the type of work that is related to one of the skills we're trying to stabilize, then that's a good match for us to then take that apprentice, pair them with a master, and get that apprentice trained up. So that now when they return to the shop, they've got that additional skill that'll benefit the shop. After that, the sky's the limit for them. If they want to stay with that shop, great. There's great, career trajectories within a lot of these shops. But if they decide to go out on their own, then that's going to be an option to them as well.
Okay. All right. Great. Andy.
Well, I was just thinking about, as we get older, as history rolls on, like these technologies that were one time sort of black magic become more ubiquitous. Like they can become more approachable, whether that's electronics or, whatever. Right now, it's top of mind for me because I'm chasing the threads on a BMW /7 that I've gummed up the threads. And 10, 15 years ago, I would have, even now, arguably, I have to ship that to some guy in Wisconsin because he's the only guy who has the die to chase those threads. But now I can order a piece, the tool for $100, and I can do it myself forever and ever. So I'm just wondering about like the trajectory of those skills if they become ubiquitous enough in terms of, I love that term, stabilizing that skill.
Yeah.
Because it is that like you're making this skill in the world to a level that one can find it without having to know the guy who knows the guy's sister, and so I'm just interested because it could be that this person, we talked about a woman who's in Detroit, I think you told me, who's doing, like, what happens if she, does her own thing? She gets out of the apprenticeship programs and she starts fabricating the tools needed for this thing and being able to pass that on and making that skill more ubiquitous. Like that feels like a potential trajectory for these skills you're trying to stabilize. Is there any, I guess it's less of a question than a thought in there, but
well, that's the hope. We want to make sure that there are, because the problem isn't, the facilities. There are other facilities out there. If you look at the chrome plating places out there, there's plenty of them out there, but EPA is making it so difficult to maintain that those are getting shut down. So it in other senses, when we're not talking about external factors like that, it's an internal factor. Like, we don't have anybody left who knows how to run this machine. So now the entire operation is going to shut down because we don't have enough people to staff the machine shop. So that's our hope with endangered skills and with the apprenticeship program. We want to make sure that we're creating a pipeline that is staffing those key positions. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting about the scenario that you brought up, in terms of, that you would have had to send the engine out to a specialist, I think the attitude is changing in terms of technology being a factor within reproducing these parts or performing functions on these parts. I think 3D printing and 3D modeling used to be really frowned upon in the recreation of those parts. And then you get to a point where it's, okay, well, we're either going to do this or the car will be inoperable, or the bike will be inoperable. So there's an interesting increase in acceptance in my observation around technology playing a wider role in the restoration of these vehicles, and that's very appealing to the young people who are out there. They're living in technology and they're immersed in it. So if we're able to bring them in by saying, okay, we're going to teach you these old school hands-on crafts, but we're also going to teach you how you can apply your existing knowledge of technology to creating parts that have never existed before, I think there's a lot of potential there.
I love to hear that, because that was one of my next questions, is that so how do you bridge the gap between taking advantage of some of the new technologies like 3D printing, or like in specific, I don't think there's going to be a chrome shop that's ever going to be able to open ever again and get a permit. All right, it's just considered to be too toxic. But what about, okay, so now there's all the new spray chromes, right, and the powder coats and all the other coatings or whatever. So in a way, would the foundation be interested in promoting solving that problem? Say, okay, listen, we just passed the time in our life when we're going to have chrome. Like you can't get a radiator boiled out anywhere. Nobody's ever going to do that, get a permit for that ever again. So once these places go, so we can keep the ones that are there. But what about the embracing of the new processes? This is, oh, look at this. Here's a new process for creating a really credible chrome finish.
Yeah. How do those two fit?
Would you guys be an advocate for a new technology like that?
We certainly would. I mean, it's not exactly our role, but I mean, if somebody were to come in and want our position on it, absolutely. It's something like that is really more the role of a SEMA or an ARMO, where it's like, okay, we need somebody to come in and actively advocate for less government involvement on how these shops are regulated. Here's this very, very small segment of like what's subject to a much larger regulation. So we need to kind of protect these small shops in the niche that they have. But in terms of the philosophy of we need to do whatever we have to do to keep these vehicles on the road, I'll tell you that my personal philosophy is absolutely we need to. And if I'm speaking on behalf of RPM, I'm happy to say that.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that like for me, the club experience has changed over the years too. And it used to be that the club was just, your friends that were, in your brand club or in your thing or whatever. And then they could have activities or not. But I'm familiar with two clubs that have really been impressive to me. And Andy, I don't know if Andy's a member or if we're just sort of advisors or observers, excuse me, but we both have aerial square 4 motorcycle projects. Okay. And so we had to join the aerial square 4 groups and figure out what we have and whatever. And now what's nice about the clubs is that in England or in Europe, they seem to take the club very seriously. I'll give you just 2 examples. One of them is the aerial square 4. The club produces its own conrods, because everybody blows them out. Okay. And so what happens is
AJS
the club,
and Matchless does as well.
And so, in the clubs in Europe, that's a fairly commonplace thing for me. So here's obsolete parts. We've got 800 members. Let's go ahead and put together a short run and we'll have them. The Pierce Aero Club used to produce headlight lenses because they were the unfindable parts of it. And then the other great example is that there's, something to be learned from the Mercedes guys in Germany, man. They used to come to California once a year. I know they have like 35,000 members. And then they have a lottery where 2 guys win the lottery. The club sends them to United States and Iran so that they can find old Mercedes parts laying in the desert and non-rusty parts. And then those guys' job is to take everybody's order and pick through yards and buy stuff and whatever and put together containers and ship them back to Germany so that there's a steady supply of restorable parts. So the club's gone from, let's have pie together and talk about how much we love our cars, which is great. And get t-shirts and stuff. But now they've said, well, wait a second, we're going to step up and we're going to handle one of the problems, because what we realize is that if the cars go and parts go obsolete, that's a much more difficult thing to get somebody interested in the project. It's like they're never going to be able to complete it, or never be able to make a runner out of it. So anyway, I've been impressed how the clubs have changed, and I'm wondering if you see a movement for that or a place for RPM in that kind of in the ecosystem, of what it takes to keep this whole thing going.
Yeah, I see the clubs as a tremendous resource for us. We've got, all these different organizations, excuse me, of individuals who really genuinely care about this, and they're looking for ways to keep not just their club, but the entire culture alive. And I think, if we can collaborate with them a lot more, the RPM Foundation has developed a lot of programs over the years to reach out to young people and engage them in the hobby. And so we've got a program called the Shop Hop, where we'll bring a group of students from a high school to several different restoration shops so they can talk to the restoration shop employees and the owners and get a sense of what the industry is like. And with our focus now on developing the apprenticeship program, we really can't run these programs as much as we used to. So I would love to partner with local car clubs that are looking for ways to engage next generation, and come up to them and say, look, we've been working on these programs. They resonate a lot with the young people, and how can we work together where you guys are kind of our boots on the ground, and you run this program and help us reach out and locate these young people who are really interested in this. I think there's a lot of potential within the clubs to have kind of a symbiotic relationship like that.
What do you think? I'll go back to you, Andy. I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over this thing still, but
go for it.
What have you seen has been the most effective way for a young person to become exposed and then sort of susceptible to catching the disease of wanting to acquire a skill or keep the classics alive? How do you go into a high school where everybody's looking at their phone? And involved in a completely different world, and throw this thing in front of them and have it catch?
What's the secret sauce, right? That's our challenge, because we're a relatively small organization. I'm the only full-time employee of the RPM Foundation. We have part-time help, and we have services from kind of our sister entity, America's Automotive Trust. But in terms of, like I said before, boots on the ground, we're very small. So we rely on those connections. We have a volunteer ambassador corps across the country that, reaches out to local high schools, asks them if they want to participate in the programs that we're doing. They'll go in and, they'll bring their collector car to an automotive class and talk with them. We administer the Student X Cup division of the Great Race. If you're not familiar with that, that's a 2,000-mile time speed distance rally, and they allow up to 10 student teams. So we actively recruit schools and museums and other nonprofit organizations to stand up an X Cup team and, have 4, 5, 6. One of the teams had 8 kids on their one team experience car culture from the inside like that. I mean, that's an event that costs $6,500 to enter, and a student team gets in for free, and they get grant funding to help them with expenses, and there's scholarship opportunities for them, for the students who participate. So we have to do these things that bring it in front of them, get it in front of them, and make it easy to engage. We've got to break down the barriers to entry. You were talking earlier about the attitude of, hey, I want to daily drive a Pierce Arrow. We've got to change attitude on the generation that kind of owns this right now, and make sure that they're welcoming of the next generation. If you show up at a car show in your 96 Miata, and I think that car is not that old, I'm not going to talk down on you. I'm not going to say, that's not an old car. I got a 1933. I'm going to say, man, that's a cool car. Even though like it was brand new when I was like 30.
You're acknowledging their passion.
You welcome them in, and so we've got to bring this and put this directly in front of them, but we've also got to change attitudes from the people who are already kind of the gatekeepers of this.
It seems to be a very interesting and delicate line, because the gatekeepers are so good with the culture, so good with the history, but they're just suck at welcoming new members and and having new things fit, and because you're right. When you go to a car show, anybody that's got the hood up, I look in it. And I don't care what's underneath there. And I see an EV car. I was like, I could care less about making an EV car, but this guy did it. And if you stay there more than 30 seconds, or if you make eye contact with the guy, he's going to tell you the story, or she's going to tell you exactly, here it comes. I started out with this, and I found, okay. So I stay for the stories, because I think I'm just encouraged anytime somebody is doing that. And I guess it all comes around to, why would we care that people spend their time on these things? And I'm just curious, what you sort of alluded to it already, but as to, how does the world get better when you keep your Ford alive and drive it, and somebody else gets to see it and gets to talk to you about it?
I'll give my favorite example of that. I mentioned the Great Race. So RPM administers the X Cup division, and we also get to have a team of our own in the race. So the second year that we were in charge of the X Cup division, we had an all-girl team. And on the team was Kinsey Wilson, who has a remarkable story. If you go to the RPM website and look up the Great Race X Cup team, I encourage you to read Kinsey's story. The different kind of confluence of events resulted in her drag racing a C4 Corvette. And Kinsey is, at this point, she is 20 years old. She's a cheerleader in college, and she's this bright, bubbly, enthusiastic person. So the first night of the race, we sit down to dinner. They had a big banquet for all the teams. And we're at a table with another team, like not one of the X Cup teams, one of the adult teams. And the driver for that team was probably 75 years old, and he had had a terrible day and was fighting with the navigator, who I think was his grandson. And they're snipping at each other. And he's this cranky guy, right? And just naturally, the conversation at the table turns to, what was your first car? And this guy says, well, my first car was a 67 Corvette. And Kinsey goes, my first car was a Corvette. And now you got these two people.
It happened right there.
Under any other circumstances, what would these two, what the hell would these two have to talk about? But they are going back and forth about their first cars and their experience. And all of a sudden, this guy who was 5 seconds ago super cranky is just having a ball talking with somebody who is 50 years younger than him, and completely opposite ends of the spectrum. There's nothing else that would have connected these two people other than cars. It wouldn't have been politics. It wouldn't have been sports. Right. The only thing that's going to connect these two people is cars.
Well, then it's big enough to take the room. It's big enough to get hooks in to have that connection. Yeah. But so I guess that the thought that I have is, how do you, it's a follow-up question, like, what is the hook, right? Because going to a museum and seeing a car is fine. Yeah. But like until you have that sort of visceral experience, or I don't know, anything short of an emotional connection, it takes weight to sort of convince someone or move that, especially a young person, to say, hey, here's something that you should invest in, or here's something that you should invest your time in anyway to learn more about, because here's the connection to, here's why it's awesome. Yeah. Not just because if you show up in a Rolls, you've achieved it. Right. It's, there's more to it than that. And it's, I'm looking at Kinsey's little bio here, and you're right. It's like, it's a fascinating story, but she's, her goal is to work in Formula One. Yeah. Right. So that's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think skills training for restoration, but being able to connect those threads of being in a garage working on a stupid carbureted motor all the way through to, Charles Leclerc winning Monaco. Did I tell you I went to Monaco earlier this year? Have I mentioned that in the show?
You might have mentioned. Did your watch match your shoes?
Yeah.
It did. But being able to sort of make that connection and put what is argued, because up to this point, what we've had, like, I mean, it's more than this, but like Orange County Chopper. Like, what is the pop culture connection to motoring and motorcycles and cars and automobilia, except this sort of stodgy, sometimes stodgy museum type of old fart pastime? Well, so how do you connect those things?
That's where I think the clubs can be a real ally to us, because if you look at the scenario that you just put up, how do we connect this generation to that, tactile experience of working on your own car? We've lost that in the advancement of car technology. So you don't have situations where a parent calls a child into a garage and says, hold the flashlight while I change spark plugs. You don't change spark plugs on your car anymore. You don't change transmission fluid on your car anymore. It's gotten to be, so difficult to dispose of used oil that, like, you don't change your own oil anymore. So people are increasingly doing less at home by themselves. So we don't have that opportunity for a parent to pass this love for working with your hands on to a child. So this is, in my opinion, where, we could be doing more with clubs. Clubs have tech nights where, a bunch of them will get together and say, like, okay, I'm having this problem. Can, 8 or 9 of the members come in and tell me how I should fix this problem? Invite some young people to join in on that, and let them ask questions, and let them get their hands on an old Model A, and let them experience what it's like to actually fix a problem on a car and then have the car start. Again, I'm going to come back to the great race again. When we had that all-girl team, we raced a 66 Mustang, and we were having fuel delivery problems. And so at one point I said, you know what, we're going to take a stab at rebuilding the carburetor. And we did it in the parking lot. And anytime there's any problems on the car, I have the students work on it. I'm not doing it for them. So I talked them through taking the carburetor off, taking it apart. We actually got the solvent, and we soaked in the solvent, reassembled it right there in the parking lot. It was 10 o'clock at night. All the lights went off. We were using cell phone flashlights and headlight. They get the thing back on the car, and they started up, and it revved, and it was like the greatest thing that they had ever experienced, because nothing that visceral had ever happened to them with a car before. And
well, it never happens to any of us. I mean,
right?
when you think about it, is that the transition from, your previous career to this one was because, and Andy, I talk with Andy about this all the time because he has a big important career still, is that he when he's on Zoom, he's using corporate buzzwords and talking about circling back and getting things done. And he's doing a good job. He's making a big difference, but yet it's not nearly as big as when he made his BMW run last week. And he sent me a video, and you can tell that really moved the needle. Yeah. That was way, way bigger than all of a sudden, that whatever happened in the corporate world last week from you watching somebody else show you slides and read them to you. Right.
Well, you're imposing, and I think maybe that's it, is you're imposing, or that situation imposes sort of this false situation of the stakes being really high, because like you're going to get home, you can get an Uber, like you'll be okay. But at that moment, you're forced to solve this problem in order to not make the rest of your week suck. Like, so, I've been broken down somewhere, and you need to do it. You've got to, and I think that's a gift to be able to give somebody, to be put in this adverse situation in a safe enough way that they have to use their skills to overcome it.
And it's too rare of a situation. Is
that's
my
right.
point. And we need to
look
exactly at ways to kind of instill that. How do we make allies out there that enable us to offer more of these opportunities to the next generation? I don't have an answer to it, but that in my opinion is the solution. We've got to enlist as many people as possible who are passionate about this and get them to invite the next generation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's like some sort of deep aha answer, but because I think you've already said it. But like when I'm just gonna maybe ask you personally, Nick, and you, Andy, too, is that I've had Andy and I had a life-changing experience standing right next to each other, even though Andy wouldn't know that because he doesn't ever pay attention to me. He only pays attention to himself, and his outfit. That's what he mostly pays attention to.
Yeah,
but when he's
it's brutal, man.
Yeah, but we
I set him on fire one time, and so I just feel like, it's fine.
Well, he was paying attention to you then. I mean, you can't complain about that, I guess.
We used to work together, and we took a Saturday off, and we rode our motorcycles down to the Harley Davidson dealership in San Francisco. Oh. And the thing is, we don't really care about Harley Davidsons. So sorry.
I've heard mentioned,
but so that's not our brand. But anyway, we were there because the Cannonball was coming in. And so these are the guys that left Boston 28 days ahead of time, all on pre-1936 motorcycles. And they're going to come riding in, and they're going to finish the race. And I'm just expecting to see some cool little bikes. But what I did not expect to see was the power of that experience and the families. And I mean, here are these guys who went out. I mean, all they did is ride an abnormally expensive, unreliable motorcycle across the nation. Okay. So what's the accomplishment? But it's a big accomplishment because the families had so much hope, and they knew how important it was to each one of these guys, And so, of course, the difference is that the guy that wins it is on a 36 BMW. He comes riding in a Gore-Tex suit. He's got a titanium mug that he's drinking out of, absolutely clean. His bike never broke down, right? And here comes a guy on a Henderson or an old Harley or an old Indian, and there's oil all covered his pants. They changed rod journals in a barn in Iowa, and have that story or whatever. But just the fact that these guys went out and put themselves into the wind for 28 days and found value in that. And then, and again, so of course I was inspired, but I think I'm going to do that. Well, I'm not going to buy a $40,000 motorcycle and then ruin it on one trip across the nation. So it's not quite right for me, but nonetheless, the value of the experience was what it was. And for me, this whole thing centered around motorsports. I love working on it. I love learning about it, whatever, but, and even owning it. But to me, where it just becomes transcendental experiences when you travel with it, and so like if you decide to take your Ford back to the Ford Museum, for whatever, and it's a multi-day trip, and along the way you realize, the things that you should have checked before you left, and you're doing it on the side of the road,
right?
You're calling guys from the Ford Club, hey, you got room for me, whatever. But anyway, just embracing that challenge, right? And then even the horrific idea of having the car get in the rain, and you just, the car leaks, everybody's car in 1933, nobody arrived dry. All right. That's not how it worked, so you just kind of got most of the, but anyway, just embracing the experience of living with it. And to me, that's where the things that I think will, can bring young people into it and have them, adopt it as a value when they say, that great race experience, or the great road trip, or we put together a dune buggy and took it to Baja, or, whatever it is that they did. If it involves that magic, it's got to be several ingredients. It can't be just one, a cool classic car. It's got to be a cool classic car, a few problems, maybe a little bit of friction. You don't have to have that, but certainly the vision and the willingness to work together, and because you just want to come. I want to have every Saturday of my life be like I rode my Henderson 4 across the nation and spent the night in a barn, in 4 barns. And I want to ride in. I want that experience. And the thing is that my life is so protected and so tame and so insulated. You hardly ever get to put the burden of your own success on your own shoulders. And that's what motorsport was. To me, motorsport was a sport. And that, when these guys crossed the nation in 1914 on motorcycles, or the first guys to drive across and had to make the roads, or whatever it is you do. But when you take on that burden, it just seems that the potential for it to be absolutely life-changing. And the other thing is that it just knocks all the assholiness out of you. Because you can't be that big of an asshole.
Leveler, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. It does. And it just, I wrote a whole article one time about how I wanted my daughter to marry bikers. Not trashy bikers, but real motorcyclists, because a real motorcycle I would never leave somebody on the side of the road. Everybody that you ride with is part of your team, and you will, and I want her to be with someone like that. So there are some things that happen for humanity that I think are actually quite high-minded through the experience of motorsport.
That is my favorite aspect to the great race, is that here you have all these different cars. There's 150 cars in the great race. They're all in competition with each other. But as soon as the day racing is over, when everybody's in the parking lot and the hoods are up and they're trying to fix whatever problem they had, everybody is collaborating, cooperating with each other. They're scrounging for parts and tools, and they're all helping each other as much as they can. And you talked about that experience, that kind of, you're going to get wet if you're driving in the car. It's not a stable, secure thing anymore. The question that I always get from every new student that we bring onto our great race team is the car air conditioned?
Yeah.
At the beginning of it. At the beginning of it, they want to know how comfortable they're going to be throughout this. And by the end of it, they are just so happy to have finished the race every day. That moment of coming over the finish line. And, when you come over the finish line, entire towns come out to cheer you on. It's like you're a celebrity for a day. So that kind of experience, I wish you could take that and rubber stamp that experience across the country, because then we'd see so many more young people getting engaged in this.
Yes, we're gonna be with you on that. If we have a part in that, that's what we're gonna commit to, because that's where humanity gets the benefit of motorsport at that level.
Yeah,
because it will change people, and like you said, if young people can make the shift from being addicted to comfort to being addicted to adventure, then there's hope. There's hope for humanity. Because like you said, at the end of your race, if a young person no longer says, "Oh, I don't care how warm it is," it's like, can we drive it to Alaska? And I go, well, it's going to get a little cold. I don't care. By the time someone says that, you have really done something unique for a person and their perspective, and that person's got something to contribute to this world.
We've done our job if that's their attitude at the end.
So we can wrap, but there is this notion that we are kind of dancing around that is in, I think, popular motoring cultures, this idea of built not bought. And like that's a very kind of arrogant, sexy tagline that was around for a little bit, in that this is how cool I am. I didn't just buy this
I'm
stuff.
better.
I made it.
Yeah.
And I think that got co-opted by a lot of, for lack of better words, sort of hipster, movementy, cafe bike type stuff. But I think there's another side of it where I think that's the important piece for, at least for me, and anyone that I've sort of had any progress with teaching them a thing in this, is that the barrier to this as a pastime, as a passion or whatever, is that 9 times out of 10, it's always been that I can't afford it. I would love to have this thing. And maybe that's why we shit on Harleys a little bit, is that, well, yeah, if I just wanted a big shiny bike that went across the country with couches and, a wardrobe built onto it, I could spend 50 grand and that I would have that. And then I would be a biker. I mean, but we say the same thing about BMWs, where they have their titanium sippy cup and they've got their bibs and all. They just threw a bunch of money at it, and that's great. Like that's how people get into that. But there is something, I think, much stronger, much more lasting to, do the thing yourself, build the thing, understand how it works, because then you can go out with the confidence to go across the country, or to have that connection to the thing that you're riding or driving. And it's just a very different experience.
It's a lot more fulfilling, isn't it? I mean, and
yeah,
like you said it, you have a connection to the machine that way. And again, I never want to turn my nose up at anybody who wants to engage in car culture at any level, because we like I said, we need to be accepting of everybody who is excited and enthusiastic about this. So we can't afford to gatekeep on any level. But I will say, if there's a way to enjoy it, it's having that hands-on connection with your vehicle, even if you don't actually do it, at least understanding it, at least understand how the machine works. And so like when it does break down, you at least have an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, because it seems to me is that like when you're riding with a bunch of guys, you're traveling with people, or doing the great race with students, it's like the biggest thing you learn is that it's not okay to walk by and see that somebody else needs something.
Right.
It's if they're looking for their universal joint in their socket set, and they've been in it 20 times that day, that means it's probably on the side of the road 30 miles back or whatever. It never made it. Right? And you see them struggle with that, and there's something you can do about it. When you have had that own experience yourself, you figure, well, I can't afford to see them lose. And so I'm going to go get my stuff. And it's like, is it your job to bring tools for the other team? No. But the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life was when I used to plan trips, to go into Baja or whatever. And I always stuffed my bag full of stuff, because I wanted my goal to be is that there's nothing you're going to need on this trip that I didn't think of, and I would have all the oddball stuff to make repairs and fix things or whatever. And that was my contribution to it. Other guys can contribute other things to the trip.
Well, that's been a huge rewarding piece of, I know we've done stuff, but like when you go out, that's actually super rewarding that you can fix other people's stuff too. Like that, and you get to help them get home.
Let me tell one, because you just touched on something that again is one of my favorites. And I know I keep coming back to the Great Race, but to me it's probably the best microcosm of car culture that we can talk about. The second year, the year we had the all-girl team, there was a race team in a Model A. They had put a flathead Ford, a V8, so later model engine, in the car, and on the very first day, their transmission went out completely. And one of the X Cup teams, the team from Auburn, Indiana, the early Ford V8 museum, had a team, and of course, this is a Ford museum. They had Ford parts, and they had a Ford transmission that was compatible. So those kids were up until 3:00 in the morning swapping out the transmission in not even one of the other X Cup cars. This is one of the professional teams, and got them back on the road. Now that alone, I think, is just a spectacular story. But the real touching part of it was the driver of that car had been diagnosed with cancer years before, and the cancer had been in remission for years, and then it had returned. And so this was going to be his last race. He wanted to race one more time. And if it hadn't been for that group of kids, he would have ended on day one. So think about the heroes. They're fucking heroes, those kids. And that's that spirit that we're talking about right here. Like, you get to walk away from that. They didn't know the background of it. They were just trying to get another car on the road. But then the realization of what you did, the impact to those people's lives, just by virtue of being willing to stay all night and fix their car, that's just absolutely spectacular to me. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah, that's such a great story. Thanks for putting that in there, Nick, because that's that. And it isn't like this modern day thing where we have to say, well, you get a chance to be a hero. I'm so tired of people that want to be heroes. And people and being a hero, wanting to be a hero sort of negates being a hero in my mind. But what's neat about this is that if you are able to take a disappearing skill and preserve it and place it in a young person, and a young person now owns that skill and is now going to be able to pay that forward, they can do that in a way and be just competent and confident and humble about it. That's just a beautiful thing for the world to have in its list of experiences. So, okay, here's the deal. We're going to end. And we're going to throw out any suggestions you have to save the world of motorsports. And I've thought of these things while we were talking. You guys jump in with yours. All right. Should we just go one to go around that way? Let's do that. Yeah. Let's just take who wants to go.
What is
all right. I'm going to throw out some. I'll just give the answer. Then you'll see what the question was. All right. Here's a way to solve the motorsport culture problem of the future. Car museums should become car libraries. You can check them out. Okay, go.
You can check them out.
Somebody else.
Actually, I'm going to jump in there because I had that thought earlier today, because yes, museums, if they were libraries, but really, they should, you make the case that all these things should be on the road and in practice, but like, what if you did check something out, or you were just the lifelong steward of this thing? Because it turns out that thing's going to be around longer than we will, potentially. So what if you were able to just sort of be a steward and be assigned, caretake of this thing, and that's just your deal? I think that there's something there.
There's, I mentioned the Heritage Skills Academy in the UK. They have an apprenticeship program. I mentioned that, Andy, when you and I were talking earlier. They have an apprenticeship program that we're, modeling very closely ours after, and they actually have a fleet of vehicles that people have donated to the apprenticeship program, and the apprentices are assigned as stewards of those cars. So like for the entire year or for all year that you are in that apprenticeship program, you are responsible for this car. And it goes both ways. You get to take it out and enjoy it, but you are also responsible for it. If something happens to it,
prep and maintenance
and fix it. Yeah. So I think that's an excellent way to do it.
That's a great payoff. Like that seems like an equitable payoff.
Yeah, and obviously it's not for all the cars in the collection, but there are a few cars that could be, like, how often do you want to teach someone to double clutch? You don't really want to be around for that. You don't want to have to hear that, but there are some cars that you could sacrifice to that terrible fate. So,
for sure.
Nick, what's one thing that could happen that would save the motor culture of the world?
I mean,
just by you prescribing it right now, it'll happen.
At a car show, take the velvet ropes down, let people, let young people in the car, let them touch the car, let them honk the horn. This is something that everybody can do immediately. And I know I'm being hypocritical because I was just telling the story about my 33.
Well, not the Ford,
right?
Yeah,
but let it happen. If they break a switch, no big deal. It can be fixed, but they will remember that moment for years and years, and that's something that can be built on very easily in the future.
Okay, very good. All right, here's my second one. Start a movement that is all about status, and the status you gain is only if you drive a classic every day. Daily a classic. Okay, so instead of going, hey, look, I got a big bonus, I'm very successful in my life, and so I'm going to roll out this or this. Nope, you get a classic and you drive it every day, an F100 pickup, and a real working car or truck. that you just drive, and that the status, all of a sudden when you pull up in the parking lot at the RPM Foundation, it says director and board director and most important person ever, and you look down there and they're all patina daily cars. They got bird shit on them, and some guys, they all, one guy's always got the jumper cables right. So but anyway, if they were really usable daily driver cars that we told the world,
a company car program, but the company car happens to be not a Jaguar.
It's got to be from
not a late model,
1911 to 1972 or something, whatever. But so that what if the status became among the group, I drove here in my car. I didn't trailer it. I drove here in my car, and this is the same car that I drive to work on Monday, and I drive it every day. This is what I take to Home Depot. This is what I take to go get burgers or whatever.
I love it.
All right, Andy.
It's no small thing, but a dedicated highway system for cars before a certain year, and motorcycles, because
travel days when you could
maybe just a travel day or every other weekend or whatever, but like 90% of the time
or flipped off the whole time.
I don't take out any of the cars or motorcycles because I just can't deal with it. Like, I can't deal with the guys and flying by in a Tesla at 95 and a 55. It just doesn't, there's no safety in that. And so even as careless as I might be, like, I'll just take the Acadia.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I got there, I guess.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I mean, that would really encourage use of it and take out some of the risk of it, because we probably, if you drive your Classic at any point, you realize it doesn't stop that well. It doesn't go that well. And it can really, other people that are on the road for a living or trying to get somewhere, they're not that charmed by how cool your car is. They just wish you get the fuck out of the way. Yeah.
They don't care about what my internal landscape looks like. Yeah.
Right.
I would definitely pay the extra toll for that highway to exist.
The Classic lane. That's right.
There you go. I like that. The Classic lane.
All right. Now, one more.
But it has a breakdown lane associated. Like, it has two. It's actually
well,
2 lanes.
The breakdown lane would have to be like 3 lanes, and then the actual driving lane is 1 lane.
Yeah, there's lawn chairs and shade because we know we're fixing these things before we get there.
Girl Scouts sell bottles of water on the side. That makes sense.
All right. If we're shooting for the sky here, I'll say a comprehensive 3D library so that you can 3D print any part from any old car.
All the digital files.
So you can build your own car if you want to.
Yeah. What if somebody took on the Google imperative, instead of recording every written word, that we had every engineering file.
But even a step before that would be
format. Yeah.
Like exploded diagrams, but in 3D, so that you could actually, what does this one washer look like that's in an assembly on it? And like, I know that there's a concave side of that washer, but I don't know which one's up. Just being able to have an updated, library of those diagrams would be cool.
Okay, or as a corollary, every wiring diagram should be color coded by someone.
Yes.
By someone who has committed a heinous crime that has to earn their way out of prison by color coding wiring diagrams until the whole world has color coded, expanded, magnified.
That would be
diagrams.
An amazing, like, if there was whatever the office is that that did that, and that was an accomplishment, that would be something to be proud of. Like,
I gotta tell you, guys should be running this. these are stellar ideas.
That's a really good idea. Color coding all the diagrams. Period.
But I like that it's prison help to get your early parole.
Yeah.
That's out of the box thinking we all need.
The people that cheat in F1, right? When they get caught cheating, it's like, at your level, you have so much money and so much fun, and you're cheating. It's like, okay, that's it. Then it's got to be like, all right, then you are going to color code, whatever.
Well, so let me ask you this. Is there anything that you're eyeing now? Like, Blaine and I are always on Marketplace, Craigslist, etc. Is there anything you're eyeing now?
Yeah.
What are
you after to wrench up? Maybe it's Craigslist, but maybe it's from a friend or maybe from a whatever. But is there anything you're on the hunt for now?
Right.
It's the dumbest thing, but I'm very fortunate in that, for a guy who, I work for a nonprofit. I don't make a ton of money, but I have several of the cars that are my dream cars. The one that I drive the most is a 68 Mercury Cougar XR7, which I've, just wanted for years and years. And I was lucky enough to find one just at the right time. And then the 33 Ford that I mentioned earlier, that's really 33, 34 Fords. That's been the holy grail for me for a long time. So I'm very lucky. But the first car that I ever really, truly lusted after, believe it or not, was a Fiat X19.
Funny you mentioned that.
Yes.
Fiat X19.
Yes, we love them. We love them.
And it's,
Andy,
they
you probably
don't
have
love
one or two.
us. They hate us because they rust in in a vacuum tube, and they want to perish from this earth as fast as possible. But I had the chance when I was 16 years old, when I would walk to school. There was one in a parking lot that was rusting away to nothing, and I would stop every day and I'd look at it. And the guy who ran the parts store across the street finally one day comes over. He says, "Look, this is my car. You stand here for 10 minutes every day looking at this car. If you give me $50, this is 1987, you give me $50, you can have the car." So I run home and I tell my father, who's, crazier than I am. And he's like, "Let's go look at the car." Well, so, he's all for it. We go back to my mother and she's absolutely not. You're not bringing a rusty old car back. So I have lusted after finding a Fiat X19 ever since. And for some reason, I think there's the little lizard part of my brain that knows this would be a terrible idea because I like to buy cars that need me and are probably rusted half to nothing. That's the car that I keep. The fingers eventually start tapping that into the keyboard, even when I maybe there's a perfect one for $3,000.
Yes,
that's the one that I constantly find
great.
myself looking for.
You said Fiat. It's funny. If Blaine had asked me that question, he's not going to. But if he'd asked me, there's a Fiat 600. Multipla. So it's like a minivan Fiat on a 600 engine, and it's amazing on Bring a Trailer right now. And I got my eye on it. I got the window refreshed here. But that and a I would like a mid-70s Ducati twin. That's kind of a Grayley type thing, but just knowing that I'm not interested in spending a whole bunch of money. But if something came up,
certainly worthy.
Blaine, what do you have?
That's great. This is the first time I've had property in my life, and I have so it's just novel. Everything I do is novel. When I shovel, it's like, look at me, I'm shoveling.
I get that.
I just feel so rural, And so at the moment, I've just got an absolute Jones on to get a bulldozer.
I get that too. Yeah,
because I've got some excavating I have to do.
Huge bulldozer, or like a little cat thing.
Yeah, probably not big enough to be like an open pit mine, but certainly big enough to build foundations and roads and roads. I got stuff to build. So I realized this the other day when I had to dig this drainage ditch, and I got a little backhoe, and so I got out there and just I got a nice scoop in the backhoe. It took me about 6 months to learn how to operate a backhoe, by the way. I'm still not any good at it. But anyway, I finally got the scoop full, right? And then I dumped it, and then I shoveled it back into the scoop to see how many shovels I got out of it. And it's like 22 shovels. And all of a sudden, when a machine does that for you, and I'm sitting there drinking a Diet Coke, going,
you can't afford not to get a bulldozer.
It's like, thank you.
Yeah,
I thank you 22 times for that little pile right there. And so, can you imagine how I would fall in love with a bulldozer? It's like, my God, you moved a cubic yard of earth for me, and now when the flood comes, it's going to run right onto my neighbor's property instead of mine. Awesome, or whatever happens. It's like,
I understand it now.
Yeah.
Good. Well, if there's anything, Nick, you want people to do it's rpm.foundation, if that's the website. Is there any sort of CTA we can?
Yes, rpm.foundation.
People want to get involved, look to donate. Everything that they need is on that.
Everything you want to know is on there. If you want to donate, if you want to volunteer, if you just want more information, if you want information about any of the programs that I mentioned, everything's on the site, rpm.foundation.
Well, Nick, let's end it there, man. We thank you for the time.
Let's have Nick back. Let's come up with a reason to do another show.
Yeah, I will come back anytime you guys want to have me back. This has been an absolute blast. I had so much fun.
Big thanks to Nick for joining us today. We'll definitely stay in touch. And a huge thank you to our newest Patreon members, Michael and Ken. Your gas money helps fund the show and keep the ridiculousness going. Find out more at patreon.com/holeinthehead. Follow us on the socials at holeintheheadmoto, or you can send an email to actually@holeintheheadpod.com. This podcast is produced and edited by Hole in the Head Moto. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Well, good for you, man.
Thank you.
It's very inspirational, Nick. It really is.
It's the best job I ever could ask for. I am thrilled with this career, and I count myself as very, very lucky to be able to do what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope I hope it's not luck.
A lot of it has been so far. I'm just hoping nobody realizes that.
Take it for what it is, but I hope you get to play. Make a couple big plays here and keep it going. And that I hope there's room for other people in the tent, so that if you're not the only guy living the unicorn life.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on in.
I found that luck only lasts you about 6 months. So if you've been doing this past that, you might be good at it. You might be doing a good job.
I wasn't familiar with that equation, but I'll embrace it.
I should say this for our listeners: there actually is another ideal job other than the one that Nick has. The other one is listen to Andy talk about his time at Monaco and what he wore.
Listen,
which is what we
listen.
Which is
I
what
really
we do.
made a difference.
That's my job.
Really
my job is to be interested in Andy. So.